Hi guys, welcome back. Today we've got a very special guest. We've got Lars Seier, who is the co-founder and owner of Seier Capital. He's also the chairman of the board for Concordium, a blockchain layer 1 solution, and he was previously the co-founder and co-CEO of Saxo Bank, which obviously is an enormous bank in the Nordic regions. And today we're going to be talking about everything from the metaverse to the future of Web3, some of the challenges that we have currently, and then also what Concordium is all about and some of its unique propositions. And we'll take it from there. But Lars, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. Okay, so Lars, like I said, going into this session, we're going to be talking obviously to a very new audience for Concordium. I know that you guys play very strongly within the enterprise realms, but today we're going to be obviously showcasing what Concordium is to our group of our community followers, which is within the Revolve Games studio. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of an elevator pitch or tell us a little bit more about Concordium and what makes you guys different.
Yeah, Concordium is a layer 1 blockchain. Basically, I started it 4.5-5 years ago with a view to take the best of the distributed blockchain that we already back then in late 17 when I started this project. You know, we knew it from Bitcoin, we knew it from Ethereum, but I also felt that there were a lot of challenges with those models. You know, clearly some technical challenges in terms of scalability, but also this very strong focus on anonymity, which I can understand why some people with in the original generations had a desire for that. But also having spent a lot of my life being a co-CEO at Saxo Bank, I'm acutely aware of the impact of regulation, etc., which we saw unfold over 3 decades while I was in that industry. And I just think we got to assume that this is going to come to blockchain as well. And if you're not prepared to have some kind of compromise with how the world works, then you're not going to get mainstream adoption. So apart from a lot of technical improvements, much better scalability, building it on proper science and a proper tech building process, we also have this rather unique identity layer at the entry point to the blockchain, not as an afterthought, not as a layer 2, but in order to have an account on the blockchain, you need to identify yourself. Now, that's not the same as us flashing that identity to everybody out there. That would also be a breach of European GDPR legislation, etc. But it does mean that you have a self-sovereign ID that enables you to release certain aspects of your identity where that might be required. And actually, in my view, that is often required in most serious business interactions. You want to be sure who you're dealing with. You want to know certain aspects of that person's ID, maybe which country that person is from, maybe the age of the person. So that is our unique differentiator. But we're also dealing with very important issues like scalability, obviously, which is critically important in gaming, and also building it on a really proper cryptographic understanding. You know, a lot of scientists involved in the project. We do actually have some gaming use cases building, and we very recently at our last grant committee meeting, we gave out 4 grants related to gaming. So we are interested in gaming. We have also a grants committee that will help people start out projects on Concordium. So while we are also suited for big corporates through sort of trying to deal with the regulation that's coming, we're certainly interested in the gaming world as well. And I think there are many areas where also our unique ID layer may be relevant. You know, if you are having serious in-game economies, if you need to age control in some cases, I think it's highly relevant for gaming as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. What type of gaming do you see, the types of gameplay that are approaching you guys at the moment? Because I've seen just, in the last couple of years, a lot of the games that are being developed are not that exciting. And I think that's like the #1 criticism of crypto games. They're not very AAA. They're not very engaging, and they're probably just there for this play to earn mechanic that obviously, as you and I know, that has got a life shelf, in itself.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of the games that have been there have been games where the proven ownership of certain aspects is important, like different games where you use player cards and, like blockchain-based versions of Football Manager, that type of thing, right? Whereas the high sophistication of many games may not immediately lend itself to blockchain. And also there's a certain pushback from the gaming industry on blockchain because the big gaming companies obviously like to control the assets that they sell in game. Yeah. That, of course, I think gamers should consider the risks of that, because that means, you don't really have control how many of a given in-game asset are actually issued. Can a gaming producer easily issue more assets, etc.? Can you transfer those assets from one game to another? Normally the answer is no. Yeah. And there, of course, I see what we do more as an infrastructural piece to gaming. If you really want to, for example, have the ID capacity, if you want to create a real in-game economy where you register certain assets and you can trade certain assets, and you want to know for sure how many of those assets exist, that's where I see blockchain playing a significant role. So, and in general, I see Concordium as more of an infrastructure piece that enables you to do stuff, particularly around ownership, around control of the number of issued assets, registration of who owns those assets. So I don't think you necessarily have to build the entire game on blockchain with the limitations that has. But I do think that if you have serious in-game economies, that blockchain has a role to play, and that we are particularly well suited for that at Concordium.
Yeah, it always blows my mind to think about that story that you told me once about Ethereum. Do you want to just give a little bit of a segue back into the day when Ethereum first started out, and you had some interesting discussions?
Well, I've probably told you many interesting stories about Ethereum. Which one are you thinking about in particular?
A very early opportunity that was presented and you struggled.
Oh, yeah, I was an early adopter of this space. I probably found Bitcoin in 11 or maybe early 2012 or something like that. So I was quite an early ambassador for the space. I also knew the Ethereum guys prior to their launch, and actually was quite interested in investing in their original auction-based launch, where they were raising, I think, $19 million to get started. And I offered them $1 million, but they got very confused because it was the only time anybody had offered them more than $5,000 or $10,000 or something like that. Yeah. But I must have been feeling wealthy that day. But in the end, they made it so complicated. They got really like, oh my God, can you buy Bitcoin and pay us with Bitcoin? And we're 3 months delayed, and they got all complicated about it. So in the end, I didn't do it, which of course irritated me a little bit, because I would have had like 3 or 4% of Ethereum if they had just taken my check there. So,
do you think that's actually changed? I don't think it's changed much. I mean, I think a lot of Web3 based companies are still really bad when it comes to UX, especially with the integration in terms of financial exchanges, right? I don't think it's changed that much.
Well, I mean, back in the day, they were clearly already somewhat concerned about the regulatory impact of taking investment from the outside, and wanted to keep it all crypto and not fiat. So I should probably just have persevered. But you have to understand also that in those days, all of this was seen as very long shots. Even Bitcoin didn't have much of a market value when I first got involved. And I don't think even the most optimistic people back then probably didn't quite expect what we have seen in the recent years. So they didn't have a great sense of urgency. It was more like, am I going to risk $1 million on this project or not? And sadly, looking back at it, it would probably have a value of $10 billion today. But I consoled myself that I would probably have sold it a long time ago anyway, just like I did my Bitcoins too early.
Yeah, I think we would have been in the same boat, definitely. Okay, so I've got a lot of working experience, obviously, with Concordium, and one of the propositions was the ID and the protocol and regulation. I just want to, sort of tap into the regulation side of the business. You've obviously always got these two schools, these two camps in blockchain, one for regulation and one against regulation. I'm of the school of thought that regulation is a vital component of the success and adoption and mainstream sort of acceptance of what blockchain potential might have in various different industries, not only retail, but also obviously enterprise, where you guys play very strongly at. The argument against regulation is the centralization component, or the characteristic of regulation being central. Who, in your opinion, or how would it be structured if regulation does come into the space across multiple different chains and multiple different geographics?
Yeah, I would call it more the unrealistic group and the realistic group, right? I mean, none of us are necessarily for heavy regulation, but it's just a fact of life, and it will come because there's no way that a sort of a isolated economy will be allowed to function outside of the rest of the system. That maybe as fringe activities, because of course, at the end of the day, blockchain doesn't want to get regulated. It's hard to do it, if it's a decentralized organization, there's nobody really to go and tell, do it. But then they're just not going to get mainstream adoption. So I agree with you that regulation is by and large a good thing, because first of all, there are some reasonable protections that society wants to put in place for very naive or amateur investors, that have got stung badly in this industry and have got stung badly in the traditional finance industry a couple of decades ago. So I think that's reasonable enough that you want to ensure against money laundering, terror financing. I also think it's reasonable enough, that you want to ensure that the capital structures, if you take on big risk, are so that if you lose, you can actually pay. I think it's also reasonable enough, right? And then there's a lot of additional regulation that are really more cover my backside type regulation, also to protect regulators themselves, particularly escalated after the financial crisis, where there was a lot of criticism of regulators, but by and large, I agree with you, because you're not going to have big corporates and serious business going into this unless they feel comfortable that they cannot subsequently get accused of having acted in an illegal, unlawful, unregulated way. So regulation tends to sort of clear out the space from unserious actors over time. It will take a long time. It did in the traditional finance industry, but at the end of the day, that is what gets an industry to mainstream adoption, and hence I see it also as largely a good thing. Then there will be some excesses, there will be some misunderstandings, there will be something where you partially throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that's always a dangerous thing. So the thing here is about getting your voice heard with regulators, because most regulators actually don't want to make bad regulation, but sometimes they do it inadvertently because of lack of understanding, or so it's for the industry to make sure that we offer our side of the coin and explain what this can be done and can do for the economy, can do for actually securing many financial processes that are rather insecure today, but can be much more safe with the use of blockchain. How will it look? I think it will look not too different from what we know from the traditional finance industry, for example, because it took 30, 40 years to design that regulation. It's not perfect by any means of the imagination, but it's there. And I think it's highly unlikely that policymakers and regulators will make a completely different set of regulations for the blockchain space. So I think it will largely look as what we already know, which are the pillars that I mentioned: consumer protection, capital requirements, protection against money laundering, terror financing. And they will try to stick it into the boxes they already know. That's not ideal, because some of this doesn't lend itself very well to the existing boxes. And I actually think if one day we're going to have a more efficient regulation, it's probably more going to be in the merge between the modern world, the new world of blockchain, and the old world, where there are a lot of synergies that can make both better, because the old traditional finance are not filled with idiots. It's filled with very smart very
Yeah.
smart people too. But once these things merge a little bit more, maybe then there could be a slow movement towards the regulation that sort of fits the whole spectrum. But I think it's the way it's going to be going. For now, nothing indicates that they're not going to roughly put it into the same boxes as we already know.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the merge, or sort of a blend between the old and the new, is what is needed to move forward. You know, I did a post on LinkedIn last week, and it was received extremely well. I think I'm not on the wrong page here in terms of, you know, how do we scale Web3? And I think we need to almost drop this petulant teenage attitude where the old is boring, the old is, you know, it was useless. And like you said, the previous industries were not made by idiots. I think there's a lot of learning to be adopted by, you know, traditional finance and also traditional, well, Web 2, you know. I think there's a whole new business model that we need to approach in terms of how do we make Web 3, or what the future of the internet might look like, and finance.
I fully agree, and for sure that I mean, we tend to, in new industries, we tend to think that everything's going to go our way, you know, and everybody else are idiots for not immediately seeing it, right? Yeah. This was the same in the early days of the internet, you know, where I was also involved, and we were going to revolutionize everything. Now, it is absolutely necessary to understand that the guys sitting at JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc., are not all idiots, right? Some of them are not very nice people, but they're definitely not idiots.
And there's a lot of money there to be obviously capitalized on, right?
Of course, and I think the way into that is actually coming with solutions that TradFi struggles with. You know, we have a big problem in traditional finance, and that's what we would call the lack of finality. You know, that once a deal is done, it's not really done. It can be rolled back for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days until cash has changed hands and the assets have changed hands. And people think that when they've done a deal, it's done. It's by no means done.
It's the cooling off period, right?
I'm sorry?
Cooling off period.
No, not cooling off period, but just the ways that a trade can be reverted. Also cooling off periods when you're talking about retail guys, etc. But also in the professional space, there are many ways that deals can be subsequently rolled back or changed or whatever, right? So this requires then a lot of due diligence and a lot of capital on both sides to feel comfortable that the counterpart will not do that, or will be able to pay damages if they do something. So a lot of capital is required for these periods of relative uncertainty, right? Although it's rare that something goes wrong, it does happen. Lehman Brothers went wrong. Some jurisdictions around the world have different law sets that makes trades go wrong. And this is very capital intensive for these periods of insecurity, where with the finality that's possible in blockchain, by far not applied by everyone, but actually is by Concordium, we have a finality layer, meaning that really every block is a new Genesis block, if you will. You know, you could, even if you could gain control of the system, you would be absolutely impossible for you to change anything in the history. And that is very important for the financial sector. You know, they could get much more certainty around their trades, a lot less capital requirements. I actually think that's a very important icebreaker into the traditional world, because if there's one thing a bank understands is efficient use of capital, and right now a lot of capital is used very inefficiently, right? And that capital that's being used to support periods of risk cannot then be used to give to SMEs or other people that could invest it meaningfully. And I know in the EU Commission, certainly there's a good understanding of this, that also blockchain could be a very important fundraising tool for SMEs, that particularly for SMEs, because they struggle a little bit with getting capital from the banks at the moment. And here there are some completely new fundraising mechanisms. But again, if you raise funds for a project, it's reasonable that you know, that you give people an explanation of what you're going to do with their money, you know, prospectus, or that there's some protection of the people that give you the money. And that's basically what they're looking for. They want the same accountability, as we know from the classical industry, to also apply to blockchain. And I don't think that's so unreasonable. If you ask for people's money, you know, you're responsible for what you do with them, and you don't want an anonymous Ethereum account at the other end of your investment, right? Yeah,
but the finality is also the scary factor, right? So people, this is whenever I talk about wallet exchanges and mistakes that might happen in, a financial exchange that happens through crypto or the blockchain. The finality factor is something that really scares people. Like once it's sent off, it's gone. Or you send it to the wrong address, it's gone.
Yeah, that's true, but that I think is a smaller problem than not having finality, that you send it to an address and maybe it never gets there, because you send it to a bank account, maybe it never gets there. You can put a wrong bank account in as well, right? So I think finality is a very, very important innovation. It's very under explored in the blockchain, because there's only a few blockchains that have what we call deterministic finality, right? In Bitcoin, Ethereum, you have what we call probabilistic finality. After a few blocks, you can be relatively sure that nothing's going to go wrong. But it's also highly inefficient, right? Because, for example, in Bitcoin, well, basically the standard is that you need 6 blocks to feel absolutely comfortable, but you can't stand and wait 6 blocks in the kiosk when you bought a Coke Zero and a newspaper, right? So this also is complicating real life adoption, right? So I think finality is very important and an underexplored area for most blockchains.
Yeah, we're obviously nearing a very important time for blockchain, and largely obviously Ethereum, with a merge around the corner. How do you see this playing out, and what impact do you think this merge is ultimately going to have? Because it's not going to reduce the actual gas fees, which is what everyone thinks it's going to do. So how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the merge, I mean, it's been touted since 2018. Now we're finally maybe getting around to it. Of course, it's a good thing that we move away from the energy users, not so much because that's not a good model, but it's just not a model you can sell in the modern world, right? People don't want to have, be on the high horse with all the responsibility, etc., for all the normal processes. And then, by the way, if you use our system, we burn the energy of Argentina for no reasonable purpose, right? So in that sense, it's good if it works. Does it change anything in terms of the fact that Ethereum was a great step forward in 2015, but now 2022, we learned a lot of stuff? Not really. Ethereum is still slow, unscalable, and that then leads to you having to build a lot of layer 2 solutions in order to just make the damn thing work, right?
Yeah.
And when you introduce layer 2s and CK rollups and all this stuff, you introduce risk, right? So all of a sudden, you're not just dependent on Ethereum, but you're dependent on a whole range of other things that can't go wrong also. And all of a sudden, this begins to look like the old world, where we also depended on many risk factors. So blockchain nirvana is where you can actually post your transactions to the blockchain itself, which means it should have very, very low fees, and it should be highly scalable, which we believe is achievable. And if you insist on using something outdated, which in my view Ethereum is, I'm sorry to say, and then build all sorts of fixes, you're just kind of reverting to the old world, where there are lots of unpredictable risk and domino effects between various systems, right? So I don't think, this is probably quite controversial, but I don't think Ethereum is a solution to very much. And 10 years down the line, I think it'll be an interesting historic achievement, and all due respect for that. But it's a little bit, I don't understand in an industry where we're all saying we're going to be very innovative, we're going to change the world, we're going to do things in much more efficient ways. And then half of that community insists on using an outdated blockchain, no matter how many fixes they have to build around it. It's a little bit like saying we're Formula One, but we insist on driving Ford Model Ts, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And of course, a lot of other blockchains have spotted that and making it easier and easier to transfer use cases from Ethereum. But Ethereum, for me, with all due respect for its ecosystem and its early achievements and the value it's created for a lot of people, it's just not the long-term solution. And we should grow up and move on, because not just us, but there are many other better blockchains out there than Ethereum. Only thing they have is the ecosystem, right? Yeah,
I mean, that's an important point. I want to just go into a little bit more on what Concordium is doing in terms of developing the ecosystem. But just taking a step back for a second to Ethereum, obviously I keep a very close eye at the market reaction with these announcements, buy the rumor, sell the news sort of thing. And what I'm seeing is actually a lot of sell pressure happening on Ethereum at the moment. And I don't know why this might be the case. Is it maybe macro indicators that one needs to take in consideration, or why do you think the market's reacting like it is?
Well, there were a lot about a few weeks ago. There were a lot of heavy buying of calls in Ethereum. So the run up was partially hedging these large positions. Certainly played a role, and as that sort of has pushed the price up to a point where people find it relevant to sell, then you have the hedge being adjusted downwards again, right? So I think there's a lot of technicalities at play. Of course, what you can't change is the fact that the ongoing minting of Ethereum will be less, meaning that there'll be less sell pressure from that side. But of course, people try to predict markets. I watched that 35 years in various markets, right? And they're very often wrong, but you don't necessarily want to be on the wrong side of the people being wrong, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much about the momentum in a market. I like to stick. I'm not a heavy speculator on this kind of stuff. If I want to trade, I trade fiat currencies because liquidity is much deeper. You can trade much bigger positions, and you can get in and out very easily without shifting the market around. So I don't basically think, unless you are very knowledgeable, that crypto are very good speculation objects. Liquidity is far too low. So I wouldn't use it for that anyway. I'm more looking at the long term. What is it that will make blockchain a mainstream feature? I'm sure it will be. Where does it make sense? Does it make sense, for example, if we're talking to gamers here, does it make sense to build wonderful games all blockchain based? Not necessarily. Does it make sense to add things that you cannot do in a traditional centralized game, like certainty that you own your assets, nobody can take them away from you, that you can transfer them as you want to other players, etc., without the dependence on a centralized marketplace? That's where I think blockchain adds value in both gaming, but also in many other industries. Because a blockchain really, when you cut it down to the bone, you take away all the buzzwords. Blockchain is about 100, if it's properly designed, very important, 100% secure, immutable data, 100% secure registry of who owns that data at any given point in time, and the ability to get an overview of the data that is public, not just dependent on somebody sitting on a central database server somewhere. And that's what blockchain is about. So you need to think, where do we need that? Where do we need 100% secure data that's documentably secure? There's also a lot of legal requirements around this coming up, a lot of new laws requesting it's not enough to keep a database. You have to show that it hasn't been manipulated. And my answer is, if the cost is not an issue, you would want 100% secure data in any business model, right? You would want 100% traceable processes in any industry. You would want the 100% secure registry of ownership in any industry. So that's what I see Concordium as being, when infrastructure play, where we can help with that aspect of things, and the knowledge that is built on proper science and on a more traditional tech building process, so it will actually be stable and scalable.
Yeah. So I think, also just in terms of security, Concordium require ID at protocol level. Now, for me, an ID requirement, KYC requirement, is a very big factor in securing a network. So if you own something on a blockchain, to make sure that you aren't hacked, or there isn't some bot activity or attack on your system, you need ID, right?
I would distinguish between ID and KYC. Those are two quite different things, right? ID is, are you Philip or are you not Philip? It's binary, right? Am I Lars or am I not Lars? It's binary. It's relatively simple. We do a lot more complicated things than that. That's actually more ideological. But it's a very important thing, because if I do KYC on you, I do AML on you, etc., but it turns out you're not Philip after all, then I miss that very important building block. KYC is a million different things. The KYC to trade a sophisticated derivative with a Saxo Bank or Goldman Sachs is completely different to the KYC done by your local paddle club if you want to get in there, or somebody that needs a limited set of information about it. So KYC is a million things, and that is really a layer 2 requirement in my view, because I cannot predict what KYC exactly you need. I can build some containers for you, so it's simple for you to put in the questions that you want answered. I can convert that into a digital certificate, so I can prove that I went through your KYC process, so we can make that easier. But I cannot predict the KYC requirements of every single business in the world. What I can predict is they want to know whether you're Philip or not. They want to know if I'm Lars or not, because that's the base of everything else. And that's where I think other blockchains fail, because they also see ID as a layer 2 use case, and there are lots of good layer 2 ID solutions, but then you're back to a silo. Then you have only identified a certain subsegment of your users, and the rest of the network can in principle be anonymous, which means you can't, if you have a need for the ID and the KYC, you can't stretch out your platform to all users. And then again, if you go back to the internet, then you're more in like an intranet way of thinking than an internet way of thinking. And it's horses for courses. Sometimes a siloed KYC ID is fine, but sometimes it's not. We just try to do the simple thing and build it in at the base, right?
Okay. The metaverse, you also said it early on, there's just so much lingo, there's so much jargon out there. We're getting lost with all the acronyms, and it's almost like bullshit bingo, if you excuse my language for 2 seconds. But the metaverse for me is also becoming one of these terms where it's been thrown around. People obviously write with the idea of getting as many eyeballs as possible onto their project. And if they say NFTs, they say metaverse, they get that type of response rates that they're looking for. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're just scratching this concept of what it might be. For me, it's just the next iteration of the internet. What is it for you, and why do you think it's so important for everyone out there to take seriously?
Well, first of all, I fully agree. There's no immediate connection between blockchain and metaverse, right? And metaverse is not a new thing. I mean, Second Life was a metaverse,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Most games can be argued to be a metaverse, right? Without any blockchain, right? I believe, of course, that there's a very strong argument as we get better and better at producing virtual reality, augmented reality, interaction between people that are not in the same place. I think it's a very strong argument for we can all enhance and expand our lives with very exciting virtual environments. And I think this will only go one way. And one day, you will be able to experience fully lifelike things in a virtual reality, right? In a virtual simulation. So we are obviously going that way because it gives a lot of entertainment possibilities, gives a lot of business opportunities, right? That is not necessarily linked with blockchain in any way. The blockchain, again, to sort of get back to what a blockchain is, a blockchain can make interaction in such a platform or such a virtual world more safe. It can mean that if we meet up in a metaverse and we want to do a piece of business, I can choose to identify myself to you upon your request. If I say, I won't tell you that, Philip, well, you can just say, well, let's not do the business I was contemplating in that sense. But we give the opportunity that you could actually know with certainty who am I, right? And again, if there are assets, which of course there will be in these metaverses, do we want to know that those assets are not just digital files that can be forever copied and hence have unlimited supply and hence no value? Or do we want to know how many are issued of them, which we can with a blockchain, right? Do we want to know if I sell you a virtual asset? Well, you want to know, first of all, maybe that I'm the seller, and I may want to know that you're the buyer. But at least you know that I own that asset, or it's in my possession, and I can transfer it to you against the payment or for whatever other reason, right? So I see, again, a metaverse can easily exist without a blockchain, and it does in many, many cases already. But if you want an extra layer of in metaverse economics, in metaverse security, in metaverse clear register of who owns what in the metaverse, then blockchain plays a role. It's a piece of infrastructure that can be relevant for some metaverses, but maybe are not important for others. If there's no economic activity and there's no risks in the metaverse, you don't need a blockchain. So I think, again, it's very typical of the blockchain industry. They sort of jump on anything that's a good buzzword lay claim to it. But I don't think there's any absolute need for metaverse and blockchain to be correlated. But I can see a lot of functions that would be relevant in a metaverse that can best be provided by a good blockchain.
Yeah, couldn't agree with more. There are obviously those certain companies of late that have gone purposely out there and not called the digital collectibles NFTs for that particular reason, because they don't want to get lost down this whole pipeline of lingo and jargon that is confusing and might ultimately take value away from their ecosystem and the players by isolating them into something that they're not quite comfortable with being yet. Okay, so I know I'm also very conscious of time, so
I would like to say one thing there, given that there are gamers listening here, because I know there's a pushback from the gaming industry that they don't really want this blockchain stuff. Why would they? Right now, they can sit and print their swords and their machine guns and their avatars and their kits, and there's no real control with what is actually being sent out there. And they have large in-game economies, get paid well. Would you want to give that up to a more secure system, where maybe you would forgo some of the earnings? Of course you wouldn't, right? But look at it as a gamer. If you want certainty that if you spend good in-game money for something, look at the certainty that you would get from having that in the form of an NFT, the tradability of that in the form of an NFT, the certainty that it couldn't be diluted by issuing another 100,000 machine guns, right? So I think I'm not surprised that the games are pushing back, because this is kind of taking some control away from them. But I'm a little surprised that the gamers are pushing back, because I think this is all good news for the gamers in terms of their security, that they don't leave all the value and all the control to a centralized gaming organization. So I think that's very important for gamers to consider, and not have this sort of immediate reaction just because they think, oh, NFTs are hyped and we don't want to be part of that. This is not about hype. It's about securing what you have in your game, right?
Yeah, but you've just articulated exactly why there is being pushback, because we're approaching it completely wrong. We're approaching it with this economic benefit, the play to earn model, which I don't think is actually a strong enough hook for people to buy into. Like if you look at, AAA gamers that are obviously largely influential in the space, they've got their Twitch streams, they're making ad revenue, they've got audiences, they are monetizing that, they're getting sponsorships. There's enormous prize money behind some of these competitions. A play to earn mechanic is not necessarily going to be the hook that drives mass adoption.
No, I agree. And there's a lot of silly play-to-earn games out there, which are really just Ponzi schemes. As long as somebody wants to pay a little bit more to avoid some work, then it'll go up. And then you get speculation. People think it'll go up forever. And of course, nothing ever does, right? Yeah. But that's not really what I'm talking. I think that's a valid model in some cases I would actually love to make a play-to-earn game where people contributed something of value rather than contributing a little blob. Maybe it could be a piece of code. Maybe it could be help with market research, whatever. Something where actually people generated some value while having the play to earn sensation, right? That would be great. But I'm more talking here about right now you have all those things in gaming, but you also have to understand that you're entirely reliant on your trust of the game issuer, right? In most cases, at least, right? And there's no need to be that. If you don't want to trust your bank, why do you want to trust your game provider, right? If you don't want to trust society, if you don't want to trust the politicians, why do you want to trust somebody that's built a great game and want to monetize that to the max, right? So here, there's a possibility of a more trustless environment where you actually know that your assets belong to you, right? So I don't fully understand the pushback from the gamers themselves, but I certainly understand the pushback from the gaming houses and the gaming producers, because that's exactly the same pushback as you see in the financial industry, or you see in any other industry that doesn't want to lose control of their money-making machines.
Of course. Okay, Lars, fascinating opinions. So thank you also once again. What should we look out for? What's Concordium up to over the next couple of months? What does the next 6 months look like?
Well, we're just building out our functionality. This is a very complicated project with a lot of science going into it, where we do a lot of basic research on cryptography that subsequently gets converted into usable components. So for us, this is a long term. We have a long roadmap for enhancements. We're going to build the world's best blockchain. That's the intention, right? We're going to build something that scales near infinitely, that has the finality, that has a certain security aspect of ID, and is properly built, so it won't crack under pressure like we've seen too many cases of already. That's the ambition, right? To do that, there's a lot of stuff we need to build, but in the short term, we're bringing out some bridges to other blockchains. We're bringing out some ability to trade the use case tokens through DEXs. We are adding interesting use cases on an ongoing basis, including games. So if somebody out there sitting with a great game and they want to see, could we work with blockchain for some aspects of that game, send us a message in Telegram, and we'll be in touch, or even give a grant if it's a good enough project, right? So we're just looking to, one, and that is the most important, to build a really great blockchain. Secondly, to get adoption of that blockchain. But I think actually building the project for the long run is the most important, rather than whether you have a little more traction now or later, because at the end of the day, typically the best product will have a good life. Might not necessarily win everything, and I don't think this will be a winner takes all space by any standards of the imagination, not in any foreseeable future anyway. But building the right product is critically important, and a lot of this stuff, frankly, is put together by a bunch of technically very savvy people, but with very short-term goals, with lack of cryptographic understanding, and that's why so many things go wrong out there.
Brilliant, thank you, Lars. That was powerful, some very, very powerful thoughts there. So thank you. Lars, we are running on time, and I just wanted to say to the audience out there, we'll be dropping all the relevant links for your, obviously your forums for Concordium. If you guys are out there and you are looking to develop a game, reach out to the team, as Lars said. But Lars, in final thoughts, any final parting ideas?
I think I'm a really big believer in blockchain, right? I believe it can really enhance most data-driven processes in the world, and most important processes in the world are data-driven. So that's kind of a given, right? I also think that we're only scratching the surface. Many of the technologies are not good enough. People haven't really understood it yet. There's a lot of educational effort. But I do think it will play a very important role, because the advantages are so obvious, unless somebody invents something even better for that purpose along the way, which can never be ruled out, right? The other thing is this whole thing about gaming, metaverse, virtual realities. I think probably in the next forever, I would say we'll integrate more and more, because there are so many opportunities in enhancing your own life by experiences. Just like gamers probably feel their life is better when they play their favorite game than if they didn't have it. Well, this goes for many, many things in the world. And I see a lot of merging between all this, because, you're not going to live in a reality that's necessarily as boring as everyday life can be. Sometimes you want a gamification of that, but at the same time, you also may want to use it for a lot of non-game activities, traditional business activities, meeting other people, social purposes, etc. So I see an increasing merge between all these things. And I'm very much of the opinion that, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, we will live an ever larger part of our life in virtual reality, in some kind of gamification, in some kind of expansion on what you get when you just walk around the streets of London, right?
Yeah, well, exciting future, I think, for us all to embrace and drive and build. Lars, thank you so much once again for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on our program. And yeah, if you guys have got any feedback or any thoughts and ideas, we'll be sharing all the relevant links. And I really strongly encourage you to follow Lars on his various forums, and also follow Concordium. They're up to some extremely exciting things and developments in the near future. And I believe that they are going to be one of the leading blockchains out there, because they follow this very same mindset or philosophy that I do. So maybe it's a little bit biased, but anyway. So Lars, thank you. Have a great day, and yeah, we'll speak soon.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for having me, and have a good day. Bye.